1 second here. If you have a drink too, Blake, feel free to drink while we podcast.
Thanks, but yeah, definitely need the coffee. So
All right. Okay. Listeners, welcome back to the Business Method Podcast. And our guest today is an Army Ranger who hunted down the Al Qaeda bomb network during his time in Iraq. He also led a platoon for 15 months in the war, and he was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor for leading his men during a firefight against Al Qaeda, which saved 20 American lives. But believe it or not, that's not the main reason he's on the podcast today. His name is Blake Hall, and he is the founder and CEO of ID.me, which is a $1.5 billion digital identity verification company, which has grown to employing over 1,000 people and credited with eliminating $210 billion in government identity fraud out of the estimated $400 billion to take place during the pandemic. Pretty impressive accolades. I know he's on the podcast today, and let's hop into it with Blake. Blake, how you doing, man? Welcome to
hey,
the
Chris,
show.
thanks for having me on the show. Can only go
Yeah.
downhill from there.
I doubt that, man. My first question is like you have a incredible resume, and we're interviewing now 100 people that have built billion-dollar companies, and that ranges from people of all different ages. But you don't seem like you're that old. You seem pretty youthful. So I gotta ask, how old are you?
I'm 39. I still have a few more weeks
Yeah.
before I hit the big 40. So
Oh, oh yeah. So I'm over 40.
Mhm.
Don't tell anybody else. So, um, and it's not that big of a deal. Don't worry about it too much. Like it's just another number.
That's okay.
When is your birthday?
October 25th.
Ah, cool. Very good.
Yeah.
So in your 30s, you should be under like Forbes 40 under 40 for sure. Like I don't know what those guys are
You
doing,
want to
but they
shoot
should
him an
put you on there.
email? I know. I was
I
like,
know. I'm gonna send them this podcast and be like, "Have you guys seen this guy yet?"
what's a guy got to do?
I know, right?
But
There's
when you whittle it down to 40, that's an impressive group. So it's always humbling when you meet somebody that's that successful, where it's like, oh, I can see how they got me.
That is. And it begs the question of like, we've interviewed people that are on Forbes 40 under 40, 30 under 30, probably even 20 under 20. And what do you think that you have, say there's an estimated 200 million entrepreneurs that are out there. What do you think that you have that those that haven't made that list or built companies like you have?
I would chalk it up to three things. The first thing is I will only work on something where I feel a deep sense of mission, where the purpose and the success of the team is much bigger than ourselves and can impact, entire countries and millions of folks. The second thing is that I think my superpower as an individual is learning. I'm a pretty smart guy, but I'm not the smartest. But I would put my ability to learn quickly up there with anyone, and that's because I'm not afraid to look dumb or to ask questions if I don't understand something or somebody's using jargon. And I just love this culture of like humility and perpetual learning where we don't have all the answers, but if we are open-minded enough to recognize patterns and to ask questions and to use data, man, you can build something special. And the third thing is that I'm just super stubborn. That once I in Ranger School, taught me this, that once you commit yourself to something, if it's worthy of solving and of your time, then you don't stop until it's done.
So, okay, let's dive into that a bit more. I'm guessing you learn the value of being focused on a mission and committed to a mission from being in an Army Ranger?
I do think that is what slammed it home, if you will. We don't have
Okay.
many rites of passage in our society today, like tribal rites of passage, and that's what Ranger School was for me. I came from, a family of soldiers as third generation. So for me, going there, if I didn't come out with my Ranger tab, would have been hard to go home and look at folks around the dinner table. But also, I think credibility is so important for leadership. And at 22 years old, when you know that you're going to stand in front of an infantry platoon of like 45 guys, most of whom are older than you, and you're going to lead them. If you show up without your Ranger tab, I mean, I'm like, how could I look
Mm.
guys in the eye and ask them to trust me with their lives? And so that was this like formative experience that I think helped deeply set habits. And then the habits that I took from that, I've built upon and cultivated throughout the rest of my life.
And then when it comes to learning, do you feel like you possess something that is, when it comes to learning, that is maybe a stronger talent than most people do?
I think I'm good at applied math. I was
Okay.
never good at more of the abstract stuff, but could always do math like quickly. And so that's a different way of saying I'm very analytical.
Okay.
And when I do something, I really look at it as like a science experiment. And in the military, we have these mechanisms after action reviews that after every mission we talk about, well, what went really well, like how do we make sure that we keep doing those things, and then what went poorly, and where did things kind of go off the tracks, and like, well,
Yeah.
what could we do better as a team, both individuals and in terms of the process of the way that we approach that problem next time, where we might be able to have a better outcome. And I think those formal mechanisms, along with just my analytical nature of wanting to codify truth, those two can be really powerful over time in terms of moving the needle. And then I love building and leading high performing teams, and only making sure that there are folks in my team that I would follow. Because if you have great managers, you're learning, and you got a mission that's worth solving. I mean, it's really hard to screw up if those are the ingredients that you're using to cook something up.
So, did you ever think you would build a company this large? Is this something like you had in the back of your mind? Oh, I'd like to do that someday, or is it something where because you had those skills, you applied them in the right niche, and then things happened and you rolled with it?
I was definitely always ambitious. I didn't know that this particular thing would be worth, what it is now, billions of dollars, and that the market would be as big as it was. Um, but I think I saw that like a year or two into my entrepreneurial journey, like that we were initially solving a problem for military families to help them access benefits, and then we had all these customers say like, hey, this problem isn't just about verifying military online. We need help verifying students and nurses and teachers and employees and senior citizens. And then,
Everybody needs help with that. So yeah, this.
yeah, then the White House, came out with a strategy and said, hey, like, why are we making Americans create logins at all these different government agencies, and we're paying credit bureaus every single time? Why don't we just verify them once and let them take their identity with them? And that was the moment, like in 2011, when a year into this, I'm like, well, that's the feedback I'm getting, that's what military folks need. They need a digital wallet where they can prove who they are, and then have this like PayPal experience across websites. And man, if we could do that for the government and for your legal identity, and that's when I was like, holy cow, like this goes way beyond one community, and is really about building the identity layer of the internet. And
Yeah.
and taking friction out of everyone's lives by getting rid of password management and having to reprove who you are, and
Yeah.
empowering consumers to control their own information. Once I saw that was what it was, now I'm like, if this thing isn't worth over $100 billion, I will have really screwed up my job as CEO here.
Well, it's really such a huge need because even like myself, I had a credit card charge that I thought was fraudulent, and so I called it in, and then actually turned out not being fraudulent. They just had a different name for the company, like there was a completely different niche. So they had multiple companies under one name, which was silly. But anyway, so then I had to. I'm abroad. I'm in Europe. And so I had to, I froze my card. They had to send me a new one. They couldn't send it. Then they needed verification to send it overseas, and it's just all this back and forth. Take a picture of your ID, the back of your ID. Then they need this and a passport and address. And it's a royal pain in the ass, like to get verified online, and I think it's just such a huge need. So I
Right.
do want to dive more into the nuts and bolts of this, but I want to kind of rewind a bit and talk more about your day as a ranger.
Sure.
I think you saw in the podcast we talk a lot to either Navy SEALs or high performance athletes and about the mindset because there's so much overlap there. And I could imagine you said you love building high performance teams. A lot of that came from being an Army Ranger as well. I'd like to dive into, your part of your time as a ranger. You were hunting down a network, the bomb network for Al Qaeda. And I want to ask you about this specifically. My grandpa was one of the 3 units that was assigned to in World War II to go disarm the atom bomb. And so he studied this while he was in the military as well. And so it reminds me of the movie Hurt Locker. I guess a lot of people say, "Oh, were like the guy in the Hurt Locker." What was that about? Is that something that you fell into, or is that did you feel certain calling to do that?
Yeah, I would say, The Hurt Locker is an interesting movie. That scene with the cereal where he comes back and is like trying to make a decision about which cereal to buy. That's the most true and real moment in that movie. Which is part of why I became an entrepreneur, because it puts lightning in your bones when you're in combat. But so I led a reconnaissance platoon. I had the battalion scouts and snipers, and we trained, for precision engagement and reconnaissance and surveillance, things that recon platoons do. But what was different was when we went over to combat. I served in Iraq from June of 2006 until September of 2007. We got over to Mosul, and some 3-letter agencies came in and said, "Hey, look, forget everything that you guys have learned about reconnaissance and precision engagement. We're going to give you signal intelligence equipment, and you're going to be running these kill capture missions against high value targets." And so we spent 6 months in Mosul, in northern Iraq, and then went down and did missions and raids in Lake Tartar, the outskirts of Fallujah, every neighborhood in Baghdad, and then Karbala for a few weeks as well. So got to see kind of all the worst spots of Iraq, so to speak, when it comes to dangerous neighborhoods in combat. Towards the end of that tour, in like July, August of 2007, there was a vehicle bomb network in Baghdad, the South Kark vehicle bomb network, that was killing 1,000 people per month, and they'd been doing that
Wow.
for several years. And so, we had operators from Task Force Night that came to us and said, "Look, like, we are having difficulty catching these guys at night." We had built a reputation for developing some innovative tactics and techniques for daylight targeting. And they said, "Look, if we embed our operators with you, would you target this network?" And over the next 2 weeks, we caught 9 of the top 10, and that network eliminated the entire level of hierarchy beneath them, and that network ceased to exist. And it was one of the last things that we did as a unit before we came back. And I knew that Iraq was screwed. I think all my guys knew there was no strategy there, but that was a moment that we all shared, when I told them, "You'll never see the faces of the people that you saved from the car bombs that never went off, but you can just look at, month in, month out, these guys were killing 1,000 folks a month, and you saved thousands of lives with what we've done together as this group of, roughly 30 guys." So I'm super proud of them, and I hope that's something they can tell their grandkids about, as they get older.
That's incredible. And were they killing? I mean, they were killing anybody, just civilians. There was.
It was awful. It was just civil war that you had at the beginning of the war. Baghdad was a mixed city. You had a mix of Sunni and Shia.
Right.
And that was 2003. By 2007, the Shia are the more populous group, and there was just sectarian warfare going on, where you had these Shia death squads going door to door. Al Qaeda's strategy for the Sunnis was, "Hey, to fight back against these Shia militants, we'll just put car bombs into markets that are in predominantly Shia neighborhoods." I mean, it's like, you listen to that, what kind of strategy is that? And all it did was just, result in some awful suffering. So it's pretty crazy. Is if you looked at a demographic map of Baghdad in 2007, it was all Shia except for some Sunni pockets and the western part of Baghdad, some central areas. And we were basically like right in the middle of that civil war as literally the sectarian lines of violence would shift, block by block through the city
Yeah.
every day. And in many ways, Americans were kind of the third wheel. Like they would both try to kill us opportunistically, but we were really just witnessing the civil war unfold kind of right in front of us. So it was an awful thing that I never hope to feel that energy again of like a city where you literally have, countrymen against countrymen. I don't even know how to describe it, but that's the context that we were in at that period of time.
Wow. It's so you can't even imagine what it was like. I suppose. Um, what did they do with those guys when you guys caught them? Do they kill them? Do they lock them up? What do they?
No, I mean, I think that's probably the most depressing thing about the whole war is that ISIS formed in our prisons in Camp Bucca.
Uh-huh.
The Guardian's done a lot of reporting on this. Like Baghdadi, who became the emir of ISIS, was a prisoner, and that's where he formed his chain of command. We let them all go.
Oh wow.
Our prisons turned Al Qaeda into ISIS, and so watching like the Kurds run up Sinjar Mountain like later on, it was just devastating. So the the day after, my like half my platoon was decorated for this firefight we got into in Mosul, where there
Mm.
were several hundred Al Qaeda militants that were hitting bases around the city. I was the only American patrol out in Mosul, a city of 2 million people. I had 24 guys with me,
Wow.
16 that could go on the ground, after you get rid of the vehicle crews. And we got in this crazy firefight. We stopped this mortar cell that was like dropping these huge shells, 120 millimeter shells in a combat support hospital. Um, killed some, wounded a whole bunch more, took some prisoner. And we had no close air support. We fought
Mm-hmm.
for hours with no close air support. Um, and the next day, I'm talking to this lawyer, and he looks at me and he goes, these guys you brought back. He goes, why didn't you kill them? I almost like joked him. I was like, are you serious? I was like, did you see the like Star Wars stuff like on the other side of the bank? Like
Uh-huh.
me with my guys like fighting in three different directions, and he goes, sorry, I didn't mean any offense, but then he like was like, look at these packets, and he's like, they just found this huge weapons cache. They swiped the hands of the guys in the house next door like 10 times the amount of like ammonium nitrate and TNT on their fingers, and then
Right.
the Iraqi judge let them go because the weapons weren't on their property. It was like, oh my goodness! Like one of the guys we caught in this vehicle bomb network had been in a complex attack on an American patrol, AK-47s, IEDs. They literally caught him with the gun in his hands. He spent 1 year at Camp Bucca and then was released and was
Wow.
immediately part of this vehicle bomb network that was killing all these civilians. So that to me is a big part of why I left the military. That I would estimate about a third of the high value targets that I risked my life and my men's life to capture or kill had already been captured and released, and
Yeah.
that was just insane to me on so many levels. That it's we lost the war in many ways in our legal system and in our prisons.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. So how long was it after that you did leave the army?
Um, well, so when I knew I was coming back, I told my battalion commander that I was going to leave the military. He had some colorful language for me. This is like 2007. he said he said, hey, effer, like he's like, well, he goes, if you're going to apply to business school, you're going to apply to Harvard. And I was like, sir, I was like, I haven't used a three-stage word in the last like month, like I was like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? And he goes, I'm not going to write you a letter of recommendation unless you apply to Harvard. And so
Wow.
he's like a second dad to me. I wrote, the application. He wrote the letter. I got in, and he really changed the arc of my life. So I went to Harvard Business School from 2008 to 2010. I was still in the reserves at that time and supporting European Command. which is interesting because that's when like the Russians first, annexed parts of Georgia and went into South
Right.
Ossetia and Abkhazia. Um, but yeah, that's when I, figured out like I want to build something meaningful where all the hard work and the sacrifice and the intellect that goes into solving these problems, that it solves something permanently,
Yeah.
and not in a way that's wasteful. And in that sense, there are a lot of parallels between like Iraq and failed, venture capital, where there's a ton of capital poured into these businesses, like sometimes billions of dollars. Look at Webvan or even Living Social here in DC, and people work really hard, and then it all goes down to zero.
Yeah.
And it's not just that you wasted $1 billion, that you just wasted all these talented people's time. And I resolved that if I ever had the wheel, so to speak, at the strategic level, I would never waste anyone's time, and that far from it, I would build something that would make everyone's life better, in a way that our employees would benefit from as equity holders, and that we'd have a positive impact on the world that would be lasting. But that, in many ways is built on what was not happening in terms of our military strategy and our foreign policy.
Yeah. What do you think it comes down to with those other companies versus the successful companies? Is it just money mismanagement? I know there's so many moving parts, but can you see one overlapping theme amongst the successful versus the failed companies?
The biggest one is they don't validate their unit economics, and Steve Blank was one of the formative like writers that I read a lot when I was starting out. So he has this book called Four Steps to the Epiphany,
Okay.
and he literally lays out the stages of company building, as the scientific method, and I think he nails it. So there's four stages. The first one is like, come up with a hypothesis that like this is a problem and you've got the solution for it. Then you validate the hypothesis by getting someone to pay for it. Where big companies like Living Social fall down is on step three, and a lot of VCs too, which is you have to validate that you can get to enough of these customers and that you get paid more than it costs to acquire them.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with Living Social on both the consumer side and the merchant side is that when you're reaching saturation and like your distribution is tied to email, the churn, that same percentage of churn just to replace the number of folks in your email list at a certain level of scale requires massive amounts of capital. And at the same time, getting merchants to do these deals that have like questionable ROI gets harder and harder and harder. And so when the unit economics don't scale to build a lasting business, you can destroy, a ton of investor capital. And so if you do have good unit economics, then you can build a company that lasts. And I think that's why what Groupon did was interesting. They pivoted to e-commerce, which is a sustainable business model. They took a write down from like a $20 billion valuation to 6 billion, but Groupon's still, chugging along right now because they solved step three, which is that you can earn more from your customers than you pay to like acquire and serve them.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds simple, but when folks have given you that much money and they expect like a certain return on it, and you have to come back into a board meeting and say, hey, this actually isn't going to work, and we would fail if we continue down this path, and so we need to pivot to this other thing that's going to make us like a third as valuable as we were, today, tomorrow, but it's the right move for the company. That takes courage. And there are some founders who just, can't ever have that. And unfortunately, if the board doesn't intervene quickly enough, then the company can literally go to zero, and thousands of people who worked in it see really like nothing for their efforts. And that's it's a great cautionary tale every time you see it happen.
So what year did you guys start ID.me?
I started in 2010. I just graduated from Harvard Business School. I'd spent a summer at McKinsey, like loved the people there, but I knew that consulting wasn't for me. There was actually a Wednesday where I looked at another guy. He'd also was a ranger, served in like 275, and I was like, dude, like 18 months ago, I was leading a task force like hunting this vehicle bomb network. I was like, I'm looking at the Excel spreadsheet at 7 o'clock. I was like, I don't think I could do this. So they were wonderful, about that. But I asked my rugby buddy if if I could stay on his couch for a while. Kevin O'Boyle. I
Uh-huh.
ended up staying on the couch in his living room for like 7 months, which is way longer than both he and I anticipated he would be there, or I would be there. And then Tanel Sirhans, our co-founder and CTO, was over in Estonia at the time.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had conversations with myself that were very similar to what I had with myself in Ranger School, where I was like, "Good job, Blake. Like you just graduated from Harvard Business School. You have no business experience other than people shooting at you. You're not technical, and you started a technology company.
Yeah, yeah, right.
You know, what like what's wrong with you?" And so, it's obviously worked out now, but I had this like naivety that if I could build a team that performed at the level that we did in Iraq under such high pressure, that certainly without people shooting at me, I could do the same thing. But I really underestimated like the thing that the military gives you, which is like a pre-built team and almost like
Yeah.
unlimited resources, and like you have a clearly defined mission that you're solving, and needed to do a lot of that by myself and with Tanel, just the two of us. And man, that was still is the most difficult mountain that I've had to climb in my life over the next 2 years.
The other thing too, in the military, people are, more or less they follow orders, and building a business, they don't necessarily always follow orders. Even if you tell them what to do, your employees, sometimes they still like wander off on their own and try to do their own thing. Like there's no little accountability there. Yeah.
Well, that's why I loved recon. It really is this entrepreneurial part of the military where you're not part of this like central command and control. It's like, hey, here's where we think the enemy is laid out. This is what the commander needs to know, and then you just have your guys that you go off and you plan a mission with and you execute it. There's very little oversight. There's tremendous trust.
Yeah.
And certainly with what we were asked to do in Iraq, I mean, we hadn't trained for that at all. And it was all new and it was learning in combat. And so if you think about entrepreneurship, like you've got a team that has like an ambiguous mission and oh crap, like the mission just completely changed. And here's all these new systems that you're given that you have no training to use and figure it out. I mean, that was really my introduction to entrepreneurship. And I'm very grateful because most of the military is not like that, but that was like the foundational early experience that I had in my professional career.
I was going to ask you, did you mention one of the founders or one of the people on the first part of your team? Are they from Estonia or visiting Estonia?
Yeah, they're
Or
from Estonia, from Tallinn.
okay, yeah. So, I've lived abroad for years and I know people from Estonia and people that have businesses in Estonia. Was part of this inspired by kind of what they do in Estonia? I know you said, getting digitally identified on or verified for
Yeah.
military people and common folks is very hard. But like, I don't know if the listeners know this, but in Estonia right now, they're very technologically advanced when it comes to they're even voting through their computers. They have a thumbprint little device where you can certify yourself, take your fingerprint, then vote. Businesses are set up for online entrepreneurs over there. They have e-visas, electronic visas for people. They have all these cool things that are going on. Was part of like what came out of ID.me from some of those ideas that were coming from Estonia?
For sure. I know for Tanel, absolutely. It was a foundational influence that he's seen the architecture of like what digital identity looks like when it's delivered correctly. And this country of like 1.3 million folks in northeastern Europe has really like nailed it.
Hmm.
Um, I think Tanel would say that he underestimated the complexities of digital identity in a country as like diverse as the United States of America, and just
Yeah.
how, but absolutely. And I think that's one of the most serendipitous things is that sometimes you just need a little bit of luck. And the fact that, the technical co-founder who's been like the best partner that anyone could ask for also happened to grow up in a country where digital identity had been built the right way and provided a blueprint is kind of amazing the way that worked out. I mean, if you just look at the odds of like, if your co-founder were to come from Europe, what are the odds it would be Estonia? Like pretty
Yeah.
low. Um, so that's been wonderful. And I mean, today we have like almost 100 million users now, and
Yeah.
over 30 million of them are verified at the level that the government accepts as legal proof
Wow.
that you're you here in the United States. So in terms of scale, we are way bigger than Estonia is. I mean, almost 100 times bigger by user population and 30 times, by verified identities, and approaching like the scale of a country like France,
Yeah.
with almost 40 million people in terms of the scale that we've reached here. So I'm really proud of him in that he's taken that and in some ways has now surpassed by most metrics, the capabilities of what he saw around him growing up.
Yeah. That's incredible. Um, if we were going to break the growth of the company down into chapters, how would you break that down? Say what would chapter one be?
Chapter one would be serving, military families, like what I would call the market wedge that you need to get into building a great company. Chapter two would be like expanding that wedge. Chapter three would be making identity portable to like the government.
Yeah.
Chapter four is like giving everyone a digital wallet where you can take your identity with you, just like you do with your physical wallet. Like no more passwords, no more having to prove who you are. You have full control over your data. It's never shared without your consent. And what that means there is we take friction out of your lives, and if you can imagine like paying with cash everywhere you went, that's pretty much what we're doing online when we have to create new logins and fill out these forms and everything else.
Okay.
In our world, we'll make it work like Visa, where like you can establish trust and access services, in seconds, and you control your data. We sell trust and convenience, and that's what it is. So I'm happy to go back, but I think Paul Graham at Y Combinator has this quote that it's better to start a company that a few people care about very deeply than a lot of people care about just a little. And I think that that's right. Like if you look at, Facebook, right, started as like a hot or not for Harvard University, and was
Exactly.
social network just for the Ivy Leagues and then just for students, and now has over 1 billion users. So I
3
love
billion, 3.5 billion.
exactly. Well, I wonder how many of them are like scam artists, like the ones that hit your credit card. But
Just 1 billion. Just 1 billion.
still
Yeah.
pretty good,
Yeah.
even there. And so that, figuring out like that unique wedge where you're almost like weirdly specific about who you're serving, and that if you serve them well, you then earn the right to serve a broader audience. And then, I think all great entrepreneurs have some version of that, where like Jeff Bezos, initially started a bookstore, and
Yeah.
he was like, well, I'm going to kill Barnes and Noble first, and that's going to take 2 or 3 years. And then, if I do that well, then I can do this. And there's like 17 leaps before he's buying Whole Foods and, Amazon Prime's like competing with Netflix and stuff like that. But like, you just pick the problem that you're solving at that moment in time, do it well. And if you can kind of see how they all connect together, that you can build this platform that is much bigger than the each component of its parts. Like the sum is literally greater than the parts. Then I think that's what great founders do, is they're able to see the strategy of how it all ties together when it's done.
I think most billion-plus-dollar companies, from what I've seen, have just started out as, I don't think they ever were like, we really want to be a billion-dollar company. The founders, they were like, let's, just like you, like, let's serve this niche and let's do it well. And, like going back to Bezos, let's, be the best online bookstore that's out there and see if we can't, crush the competition of in-person bookstores. And they have. It's a little sad because I like bookstores, but you go into a Barnes and Noble these days, or any of the other ones, and they're kind of like, there's a few people in there. There's not a lot going on. It looks like it looked like Blockbuster, in their final years of operation. You're just like, oh no.
Yeah, it's so sad. And I love
Yeah.
Blockbuster too. I mean, going there, the release came out, like none of the movies are there, but I mean, it's
Yeah,
it's like a relic of a bygone era as we're getting older.
it really is. And it leaves the question to, what, as we grow, so rapidly, as human population evolves so rapidly, technology wise, like what are some of the things in the future that you either see are needed or might come out that'll be like significant changes like, from Amazon to going to online, Blockbuster to Netflix, these sort of things.
Well, I can talk about what I know, which is identity. And I'm so passionate about identity because identity underpins, literally everything. I mean,
Right.
you ever left your kids at home with a nanny for the first time? Like, hopefully you did like a criminal background check and a credit check, but trust is earned over time. And we have this wonderful nanny who's been with us for like 5 years. She's like part of our family now. That helps my wife and I raise our three kids. But then the identity, like you then have that trust, but it's locked inside of like a unit. And so the question is like, how do you unlock it and democratize it? So like, I know that my nanny's trustworthy. My wife knows that. If she went to care.com, how would the world know that? That like,
Right.
how do we confer that? And that's really kind of what ID.me does. And the purpose of identity is to help you say like, hey, I'm trustworthy. Like if I'm on eBay, I'm a trustworthy seller, or if I'm on Venmo or whatever, like, I'm not going to scam you like is happening on Zelle. And so when you think about where identity could be applied, I love this notion of like adding verified identity to social media so that you can just get rid of bot traffic, that you could have verified accounts, but without uploading your social security number or your ID card to Facebook or to Twitter directly, that you just have a third party utility that says like, hey, we'll verify that Chris is Chris, and you get a blue check mark on Twitter. And
Yeah.
we might have collected some sensitive information to verify that you are in fact, Chris Reynolds, and that you're the host of the Business Method podcast and things like that. But as far as all the things that only Twitter would need to know, is they just need to know that that's your name and that you're a human. And when they do that, like the algorithms can strip out the bot traffic. When I look at like healthcare, there are 1 out of 5 hospital CIOs, and these are the ones that admit to it. From this Pew survey that was done a few years ago, they attribute at least one serious case of patient harm or death to patient matching errors, which are identity
Wow.
problems.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my God. So, and this is where like you have this tension of HIPAA and everything else makes healthcare records in some places harder to get to. But there's also this standardization problem where different hospitals collect different data elements, and they don't really share all that well. And you also have registrars, which are the lowest paid people in the hospital, that are transcribing that dang clipper that you
Oh,
fill out.
wow.
And it actually results in harm in our healthcare system. And so I'm like, holy cow, well, maybe if you just empowered the user to have like a digital copy of their driver's license and who they are, and if they could just permission that to the healthcare clinic, and if that would both save them time on check-in where you don't have to fill out that clipper and produce all these credentials, but also once the data hits the system, it's entered correctly, that
Right.
actually would like reduce instances of harm, I think, as the metaverse comes online. And I'm fascinated by this notion of verified attributes for our discourse too, that the comment section of articles is always just like a disaster in terms of like being toxic and everything else. But what if somebody could comment on an article and say like, I'm actually an active duty service member, that's serving in Iraq, and here's like my opinion about it, with their name masked, right? So they could say,
Right.
and maybe doctors who are verified could comment on healthcare articles and say like, this is what I think about Medicare Advantage, or various programs. And you could filter the comments by expert commentary, folks who really are credible and have a voice that's worth listening to. I think that would be phenomenal. And
Yeah.
that's all made possible through digital identity and empowering people to control various credentials and say, hey, I want to be pseudonymous in terms of who I am. Like maybe I'm an accountant at Enron. And
Yeah.
so you can see that I'm an employee at Enron, but you're not actually going to see my true identity as I'm talking about these practices that aren't right, that are misleading investors and things like that. So I think that to the extent that we succeed in digital identity and why it's so important, it's going to influence everything from the metaverse to social media to checking into a hotel in a way that makes your life better and ultimately gets more of these trolls out of our online conversations.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That way, you know if you're talking to somebody verified or a flat earther, or reading a review from somebody that just has absolutely no idea what they're talking about,
Yeah.
which is a lot of people, a lot of the things that are out there, the reviews that are out there. Um, what about so you went from as an Army Ranger leading did you say a team of 24 people? Was that right?
My platoon was 32, but yeah,
32. Okay.
generally when we went on patrols, we usually have 24 because some guys were, on rest days and just giving them a little bit of a break.
Yeah. I think as I've interviewed, entrepreneurs in all ranges, um, I think for the entrepreneurs that have even 6 and 7 figure businesses, the idea of having 1,000 employees seems uh, incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could take us through the process of, maybe your own personal mindset shifts that you've had to have through the growth of the company.
Yeah.
Some of the key ones that um, helped you either let go of control or be comfortable with having 10 employees to 100 employees to 500 to 1,000
Yeah.
employees, and what you've had to do personally to manage that.
I love this question because it is the hardest problem to solve on both, I think, an intellectual and on a personal level, especially when
Hmm.
you're dealing with people that you care deeply about. And I think all leadership starts with caring.
Yeah.
But it's also where I think we've got a lot of it right, and I've got some value to impart. So when I was moved up to the recon platoon from the line, the line, you had to like push people to do things and tasks, and it is kind of like being like a parent with like, come on, like clean your room and like stuff like that. Recon was completely different, and for the first time, I could pick and select whoever I wanted, from this unit of like almost 800 guys.
Oh
And
wow.
what I
Okay.
found in recon was I'd be like, hey guys, like, what about this? And I'm like, sir, like, we did that 3 days ago. Okay, like, I will be
Uh-huh.
back in my office drinking coffee, thinking about other tasks that you've already completed. And
Yeah.
and I was like, how can I be worthy of leading such a group of men who are high performing and competitive and intrinsically motivated, right? And once I was exposed to that, I was like, hey, why would anyone ever want to go back to, a culture where people are not self-motivated and type A and like are just like chomping at the bit to be excellent and to realize their best potential. So I love that part of it. But then the other part was like, well, how do I select? That I know when a guy's trying out for recon, you have to be able to run like 6 minute miles like for forever. If you can shoot and you're super personable and great, but if you just are can't run and you're
Mhm.
going to do an 8 or 9 minute mile, I have no use for you. And so um but beyond that, I'm like, well, how do I screen them? How do I evaluate and know that they're going to be a good member of the team, a good leader, and everything else? And so, uh, again, back to learning, what I did is I started to codify over the course of my career, like what made this particular leader really good and what made this leader like not so good, or we had to make a change. And so we codified a few things into that in the culture and the values of IDME. So our first value is don't be a jerk. And what we mean by that is that if you can't control your fight or flight impulse, you're not welcome here. Um,
Mm.
and I don't know that the military does a good job of like reinforcing this. And it's a
Yeah,
different,
right.
it's like a sports team. I mean, but if you fundamentally like are just a jerk and like belittle people and cannot control that fight or flight, and you go into that state of mind where like we say things in relationships we don't really mean, and then when we get out of fight or flight, we're like, I'm so sorry. You want folks who are emotionally stable and can control that and who are just fundamentally nice. Um, we have another value that's inspire people with your passion. And what I mean by that is I've never had a positive working experience with a pessimist ever. Like
Mm.
I love skeptics. I love critical thinkers. But if you don't have that fundamental like glass half full can do attitude, especially in entrepreneurship where you're the whole thing is contrarian, right? Like most people,
Right.
you're crazy, that's never going to work. You need people who believe and are going to give everything, and who are going to lift up the team. And when you have those inspiring, charismatic leaders, we all know them, where it's like, has that person ever had a bad day? Like, those are the best folks to work with and for, because they're even when they're like calling it like they see it, they're still doing it in a positive way. And so
Mhm.
then we screen for that in our selection. We'll ask folks Rorschach block type questions, like, what do you want to do, next in your career? The folks who talk about what they don't want to do, they're inherently pessimists. The folks who know like what they're passionate about, what they want to do, are optimists. And so we have clear like rating criteria. So on and on, like, always compete. We look for people who are weirdly competitive. And so if you're like nice and you can control your fight or flight, if you're super competitive, if you're an optimist, um, if you practice empathy, treat each customer like your favorite family member. I mean, even a
Mhm.
question like, tell me about the last time you did something for someone else when it benefited you nothing at all. If you're a jerk, like, you're just going to be like, if you practice empathy and kindness in your life, you'll have all sorts of examples where you can talk about, situations that are important to you, where you've helped people who are powerless. And so screening for those values in a systematic way is really important. And then the other skills, Google at work has done a lot of research on this: cognitive ability and skills testing. If you can like figure out how quickly somebody can process information, it's almost what like the ACT and the SAT are for like college. Like, this is your ability to like process information.
Uh-huh.
You can screen for the personality traits and the habits. And I'm a big fan of Aristotle, like, we are what we do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit. And
Mhm.
then if you can screen for the skills, that they're a salesperson, like, do they listen? Are they able to like take product expertise and like present solutions in a way that contributes value? If they're an engineer, how do they write code? It's probably the hardest one to do because it's decentralized. But if you can do those three buckets, you can begin to have a consistent way of evaluating and selecting people that are going to fit with your culture, that are going to have the right skills, and that are smart enough at the level that you need for them, right? If you're going to be a software engineer, you need to be smarter in general than folks who might be doing more entry level tasks that do not involve technical skills. And so being really deliberate about building a system around evaluating and selecting people is super important. And that's just the first part of it, because then managing managers and like leveling that up, you'll find that even folks who are really good at a certain level, um, as specialization increases and as the scale increases, some people can't see the system in the same way that the founder can. In many cases, sometimes the founder can't see the system, which is why the board, will replace folks. And so
Mhm.
that's a transition point that I certainly have like worked my tail off to navigate. Um, but is like a whole separate set of challenges once you've nailed like that first set, which is like consistent way of evaluating and screening people.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, let's talk about the you getting to unicorn status when you guys raised $100 million. I think, in alignment in this your answer may overlap from this question from the previous question as well, but the idea of that for so many people is just seems so large, like such a huge thing to do again to manage over. Um, and was there any hurdles for you personally that you had to go over through that growth of becoming that large of a company? And I could see that directly related, kind of your answer maybe related to the last question, put the right people on the team. But I'm thinking about you personally. Do you feel the weight of the company on your shoulders? Because it seems like, running a six-figure online business, there's a certain amount of weight a person would have. And then I actually have a good friend who last year he hit 10 million in his company, and he's in his
Yeah.
30s as well. Feels a ton of pressure on his shoulders. But then people that run, multi,
Yeah.
even 8, 9, and $1 billion companies, they don't. Do you feel that personally?
Yes. You can't. even as crazy as like the stress of like starting, the company was in the early days, when you hit the scale that we're at of like, 100 million users and signing up 125,000 users a day and over 1,000 employees. And oh my goodness, like the stock market in the beginning of this year crashed for like 50% for all the like newly IPO'd tech companies. And, we went from growth to efficiency mode. It is an unbelievable amount of stress, and I think for that reason, I don't know that I've been great all the time. I was talking to the CEO of a public company, and he said, Blake, he's like, I don't know any public company CEO that doesn't like either drink or is on Xanax. I was like, oh, amazing.
You're like, great. That sounds like the CEOs of McDonald's. They all die before they're 55, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think, there's a tendency, like, how do you cope with that? And
Yeah.
sometimes, and I've never even been a big drinker, but I think like during some of those moments of high anxiety, like I started to drink more often. It's been taking a conscious and deliberate effort to say, hey, you need to make that a healthy habit, and put the treadmill in at work and walk and work out and take care of your body, because that's the most important thing, if you want to be a good dad and a good husband, and just have energy, and to be a good leader, because that stuff strips your productivity away.
Mhm.
So yeah, the pressure is enormous. And I can talk a little bit about some of the steps that led us to get to the heights that we're at from a strategy point of view. But man, that I don't ever want to sugarcoat the personal cost. When you have all of these stakeholders and investors who've invested now hundreds of millions of dollars that want their 4x return, and you have your commitment to serve all the users, to access vital programs. You have competitors who are not playing fair and by the rules and coming after you. I mean, there's a tremendous amount to manage, and it definitely has it takes a personal toll, in terms of the just the impact it has emotionally on me, for sure.
Well, what are some of the things you do to turn it off on a regular basis?
Yeah, I think you just have to create healthy habits. So what I found is, like putting in the treadmill, and I've got it off right now just to like not have the background noise, but I just put a walking treadmill underneath my desk, and I have a lazy workout where I'll like knock out 4 to 6 miles every day just by like, walking at 1 mile an hour on my desk.
While
I take my
working?
daughter while working. Yeah, I take
Yeah, that's
because I've got 3 kids. Like if I come back at the end of the day, like the notion that I'm gonna like knock out a 5 mile run like I used to, it's not gonna happen.
yeah, yeah.
Glass of wine on the couch is more likely way to go. And so, um, I think that's really been it, is like to make sure that, if whenever you want to do something that's like an unhealthy habit, if you can substitute something that's healthy for it, like, no, I'm going to have some caffeine free tea, and like that's what I'm going to have before I go to sleep, and I'm going to go to sleep on time and make sure that I get a decent night's rest. But you have to be like really deliberate about building those habits slowly and then sticking to them to break a bad cycle, and to be self-aware, to know that like you might be slipping into something that's not healthy.
Do you manage your family time also? You stopping it at the same time every evening and making sure you get family time and dinner with them, or what's your routine like?
Yeah, well, I think routine is what's critical. Like you've got to build that in. So I take my oldest girl to like soccer 3 days out of the week. So that's like our time together, like an hour and a half, and I'll work out while she's practicing, and then we do rec for my 6-year-old, my 2-year-old, on Wednesdays. That's my time, with them. And I think having those blocks of time where you're spending dedicated time, then, Fridays and stuff, I'm home and we have dinner, and like we play on the weekends and go to playgrounds and stuff. But I think you have to make room in your schedule to have consistent time. Even before, unicorn status, I would cook dinner at home, 2 or 3 nights out of the week, and I would take my kids to the park. And like that was our routine at that point. Whenever you lose that and like your schedule just dominates family, it's probably not going to happen or not be the quality engagement that you want. So I can't recommend enough to like carve out that time and make it part of your routine and process.
So you said you're working out when your daughter's at soccer practice. I just got an
Yeah.
image of you like running alongside the field and doing some push-ups outside and like going over the monkey bars and did some pull-ups. Is that type of workout that you're doing?
It's
Or
no. It's a really nice facility called the St. James in Springfield, Virginia. So
okay.
it's an incredible facility. So I'm inside of a gym. They play like the old school hip hop, like Nelly and Warren G and stuff. So I'm in there, usually like hitting the weights and the bench press and free weights with a bunch of folks who now are a lot younger than me. So
That's cool. That's cool. Um, okay, so back to some of the strategies that you were talking about. That so we did talk about what was the name of the guy's blog that you read that
Steve Blank.
Steve Blank in his book was called The Enlightened
It was 4 steps to the Epiphany,
The
and
Epiphany. Okay.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And those are the strategies you applied. It was can you remind me of those?
Yeah, so there were two things. Like one, I called up David Tisch, who is the managing director of Techstars New York, who's one of our angel investors, and I was called him up in like late 2010. I was giving him an update on what was going on. He's like, Blake, he's like, that sounds great. He goes, but that's all business development stuff. He goes, you want to build a product-led company, right? He goes, you need
Yeah.
to read this. He goes, go read Steve Blank's 4 Steps to the Epiphany. It's one of the best pieces of advice that I got. And then, you know, I don't know. I think it was like late 2011 as we were getting feedback about, hey, your destination website, like not really interested because you don't have any users, but we have this problem with verifying, military and employees and students, and the federal government came out and they said these customers like from huge Fortune 500s were like, if you could build a way for us to verify who somebody is like on our website and not on yours, we would buy that. And I went to Andy Dunn, who is the founder of Bonobos, who was one of our early investors as well through this group called Red Swan. And he invited me up to his apartment in New York City. So I took the train up from DC. And it was just this unbelievable night where Andy Ratcliffe, who's a Hall of Fame venture capitalist from Benchmark, was there. He was the founder of Wealthfront. So he
Hmm.
was giving this presentation on Wealthfront. The founders of Venmo were there. The founders of Warby Parker were there. My buddy Andy Dunn,
It's a
is
good
there.
room to be in.
Incredible room. Yeah. And then here's
Yeah.
me who like, hasn't made it at all, but like looking at this collection of rock stars. And so that night I was in conversation with one of the founders of Warby Parker, and he looks at me and he goes, how much capital have you raised? And I said, just under 3 million. And he goes, he goes, don't F it up. Big stigma. And so I was like, thanks.
Thanks, coach. Great advice.
But I love that like brutal honesty because
Hmm.
I already knew what I needed to do as a leader, which is like listen to the customer feedback and forget this like website and build like PayPal for identity. That's what the market wanted, but there's so much inertia and like the whole business plan, everything you've talked to the board and how you've hired early employees is about, we're going to do X, Y, Z. And this was a complete pivot to say, no, we're not going to be a website or an app. We're actually going to be a distributed utility. The go-to-market, the growth strategy is going to be completely different because that's what the market is telling us the actual need is for. And that's what folks will pay for.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like that, I did that the very next week. I'm like, well, look, if I'm going to fail, because I could see that the current strategy, like we would run out of money and we go to zero and everyone would go their different ways. But I'm like, if this is my one chance, if I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail like my way, going for like what I know is the true opportunity. And so for the next year, we built this product that was able to like verify folks through a digital wallet on third-party sites. And I still remember like we somehow closed Under Armour as like the first large customer to put us in their checkout flow. We had a pilot with the VA and then Telluride ski resorts, randomly in like November of 2012. But it took a full year to build this. And I just remember like the day before we went live with Under Armour, like I literally wanted to be sick because if that didn't work, it was over. And it did work. Thank goodness. We signed up something like 48,000 users in 45 days. the results for Under Armour, even at like minimal scale, they were like, we love it. And then it was on, but holy cow. And I think, to borrow a line from General Petraeus, like the first responsibility of leaders is to get the big ideas right. And I was just so grateful for the folks who give me blunt feedback that
Mm-hmm.
ultimately gave me the courage and resolve to go for it.
What do you think you would have done if that didn't work with Under Armour?
I don't know. Like, there have been two moments. One was very early on when I was still like, I was on my buddy's couch and Tanel was over in Estonia. And it was like 7 months post graduation. I'd literally been living, I was probably the only homeless Harvard Business School graduate in like the country, like living on my rugby buddy's couch. And we'd been pitching USAA and military.com to distribute this, like military facing platform, and good meetings. But then I called them up in February and I was like, hey, the contact at USAA, I'm like, when would we actually do this? And they're like, well, just to set expectations, like fast for USAA is 2 to 3 years. And if we're moving lightning fast, it's like 18 months. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God. I was like, I'm not going to stay on this guy's couch for a year and a half just to run an experiment that might fail. And so I called Kelly Purdue, who's on our board. He was just an early mentor to me and was unbelievable. I would not be an entrepreneur today without Kelly. And I was like, Kelly, I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. And he said, first, never tell that to anyone ever again, because no one's going to write you a
Right,
check to like
right,
give you
right.
the bandwidth to figure it out. And then he said, two, chin up. We're going to figure this out together. And so I'm always grateful to Kelly, because I never had a similar moment like that in Ranger School. Like Ranger School was always like, I will literally die before I quit. This is one of those things where I'm like, am I just not qualified, or am I off track? And Kelly like lifted me up in that moment of really like near despair, and convinced me to go for it. I had like $10,000 in the business account. I had $8,000 in my personal bank account. I moved to DC and signed a $55,000 rental agreement for a townhouse, which is either crazy or like ultimate confidence. And then we closed like a seed round of 500K, fortunately, like 60 days later, and then built, the core of the team. But if after, 2 years of work, if we still had not found product market fit, and we didn't have enough capital in the bank to like last us more than like 3 or 4 more months, I don't know that. I think that would have been the end of the road, to be
Yeah.
honest.
I think it's a blend of crazy and confidence too. Like to do anything entrepreneurial, you've got to have a little of both, no matter at what scale. Um, do you feel like there's any strategies that are really essential to build a company like you have that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, I think self-awareness is really critical. And Brian Armstrong at Coinbase wrote a really good post about the four different types of CEO, that you can have technical CEOs like Zuckerberg, you can have design and product CEOs like Brian Chesky at Airbnb,
Mm-hmm.
you can have operational CEOs like Travis Kalanick at Uber, and then you can have sales-oriented CEOs like Aaron Levy at Box and Mark Benioff. And you really have to be self-aware about what type you are. You also have to be really self-aware to not hire or start a company with a co-founder who has the same skill set as yours.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of research too that HBS has done in entrepreneurship, but like if you hire or start a company with a co-founder and one's going to be CEO and the other one's not, and you have the exact same skill set, whether it's sales or operations or product and design, there will be a divorce, and those are usually the messiest divorces. So it's really
Mm.
important that the initial team has an overlapping, or I'm sorry, like a linking set of skills that do not overlap too much, so that everyone has their own turf. And that's why like my relationship with Snell has worked very well, as the technical co-founder, and I'm the non-technical co-founder, but technical enough that I can hang with CTOs and CIOs for hours and not need anybody to wing me. Uh,
Right.
So I think that foundational set of advice is to like make sure that you understand that you're going to need all those skill sets if you're going to build a company that scales, to make sure that you know what you are and don't hire anybody who's got the same skill set as you at the exec level.
Yeah, that's great advice. I was thinking about that and I was wondering if my co-founder, who is very similar to me, has too many overlapping similarities. However, though, he's a more of a minority in the company and I'm the majority. So
Yeah. As long as there's one clear lead dog, yeah, that's helpful.
yeah,
And it does depend on the type of company, but in general, especially in tech, where it's like the road is towards specialization and one
yeah,
race to the top. The folks who come in as co-founders, but ultimately are not going to be equals, that always leads to weirdness.
yeah. I read that you work till 3 a.m. quite often and sleep 5.5 hours per night. Is that true?
I try to sleep a little bit more than 5.5 hours. I try to get at least 6 hours. I am definitely a night owl. I think there's something genetic that at like 10 or 11 p.m. I just catch a second wind.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, if you left me to like my own devices with no external responsibility, I would go to sleep around 3 and I'd wake up around 9.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the sleep chronotypes? Have you heard of those
No,
before?
I'm not. I'd love to learn more now though.
So we interviewed Dr. Michael Bruce, who's like he's been on Oprah, he's been on Dr. Oz like dozens of times, like and he has these, I think it's 5 different sleep chronotypes, and it's really based on DNA. So a lot of times very similar to your parents or grandparents, and they're different ranges of our sweet spots to sleep. So I think the bear chronotype is like, which is me. They go to bed between 10:30 to 11:30. Generally get up around 7ish, and then they have different times of peak and productivity throughout the day. They have the night owl, of course, that goes to bed very late. One of my best friends is a night owl.
Mm-hmm.
He's the most productive in the nighttime, ends up going to
Yeah.
bed at 4 a.m., sleeps until 1. And so it's really kind of cool to dissect your own sleep chronotype and then understand it a bit more, because you can understand, you don't feel like you have to necessarily succumb to society's schedule or hours when you understand your sleep chronotype.
Yep.
And one of the tests that they did was that for the night owls, they were trying to get them to start work at 8 a.m. and they were horrible employees,
Yeah.
because it was completely off of their rhythms. And for the night owls, when they had them start work at 9:30 or 10 a.m., their productivity absolutely skyrocketed.
I love it.
Yeah, it's very cool to see, and it's fun to like listen about that and understand it more, because sleep's everything. But you're doing 6 hours a night. Are you taking naps in the afternoon, or can you go solid with six
No,
hours?
I'm good. As long as I get 6, I'm fine. There
Yeah,
might be like on the weekends where I sleep a little bit longer but in general, if I get 6, I'm good to go.
yeah,
Um, I think I think what you just said though is a big part of why I made sure that my culture was not process based but results based.
right.
And that was just again from observations that the military is with the haircut and like everything else, and then you get over into like theater and you're in Iraq and you're like, well, who's that dude who looks like ZZ Top? And it's like, well, that's a Delta operator. So it's
Yeah,
like, that guy's a god of war and like does nothing about these artificial conventions of
yes,
making sure that your hair is short, and he's literally at the top of the apex predator, if you will.
yeah,
And at McKinsey, you had these partners that were debating about whether or not you could wear jeans to the office on Friday. And I'm like, oh my God, there's so much intellect in this room. Like, of all the problems to solve, like maybe just
yeah.
let that one go and let folks wear jeans and solve the stuff that matters.
Right.
And then being a night owl myself and like vibing with that like, yeah, don't make me come in at like, if I'm going to do my best work at, midnight or 1 a.m., let me do that, company. And
Yeah,
as long as I do my work great, if I
yeah,
roll in at 10 or 11 a.m. or noon, but I just rock this like, piece of content or whatever it is that I'm responsible for, and that's awesome, then judge me by my results and not based on like forcing different sleep chronotypes into the same pattern. So that's always the way that I wanted to be led, which is like let high performers manage themselves, hold them accountable for results, but just get out of their way. As long
Yeah.
as they're a good teammate and like they're working cross functionally, let them figure out their schedules. And great stuff follows when you let high performers kind of choose their own adventure, so to speak.
100%. So 6 hours of sleep a night, and then are you drinking coffee throughout the day?
Yeah, I drink like one coffee in the morning, like usually. So I don't drink like an excessive
Okay.
amount. And then yeah, I'll usually take a little like pre-workout thing before I work out around like 5 or 6 p.m.
Weights.
Like, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
you do
So I
weights
get
in a gym. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, I get cardio in like during my workout, or if I do cardio, I try to do that when I first wake up. And I think there's a lot of research there too that shows that if you can do the cardio, it's where you burn the most fat because your body's been fasting. And then when my circadian rhythm is like lowest, like towards dusk, I'll take that little pre-workout, not a ton, but just a little bit enough to like juice me up going into the workout. That's pretty much it. Until put the kids down for bed around like 8:30, have a little bit of time to hang out with the wife, and then usually like she goes to sleep and I'm like, okay, like it's on, and then I'm working.
What type of diet do you keep?
Uh, right now I'm eating a ton of fish, like sushi and stuff. With three little ones, I try to avoid mac and cheese as much as I can. So it seems to be like ever present. But no, I'm
Uh-huh.
pretty good. Like I usually have, I mean, I'm not a big breakfast person, maybe like a muffin or something when I wake up. I'll have sushi for lunch almost every day. I'll just walk across and get that. And then for dinner, we'll do like salmon or chicken or stuff like that. So I have a pretty healthy diet. I think avoiding unhealthy snacks is like the biggest thing, especially with kids. So like trying to stay away from carbs. Um, which again, like I do a fair job of, although I have my cheat moments. So
Yeah, we all do, you know, even the best of the best.
yeah.
Um, um, I think we're gonna wrap it up here, Blake. It's been a great podcast, and I really appreciate you sharing all the information and your stories, and I've enjoyed your stories as a time as a Army Ranger and some of the stuff you shared there, and then how it incorporates and into your mindset with business and building teams. Like it's absolutely phenomenal. I'm super super excited in my own personal life to grow my own high performance team and as I grow as an entrepreneur. But I think like even me, and I've seen this amongst other entrepreneurs, like it's challenging at times to like, oh, I've got to lead this person who I think is maybe more of an impressive individual than myself,
Yeah.
in many different ways. But you got to get out of your own way and your own shit, just to let that happen.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you have a mission that's worthy of following, that's a huge part of it. That's
Yeah.
part of what you're selling. And then every leader has to figure out what they are bringing to the table that makes them uniquely credible.
Yeah.
It's true at every stage and scale of the business. So, as the go to market like founder, I had to close like the earliest sales and then to build that. So Under Armour and then, Fanatics and then by that team we had A's like Spence because I wanted to take credit for that. Spence closed that and then Chelsea closed. And to show that you can build a team that can close those accounts and scale. And then when we crossed verticals, the government to close them, but then to build a sales team behind that, and then to layer yourself and like fire yourself from different tasks. And um, it really is this like it's this evergreen journey of adaptation and making sure that for what the business needs at that particular stage in time, that you're able to learn fast enough on your own personal growth curve to keep up with it. And when you have a company that, goes from 15 or 16 million in revenue to like well north of 100 million in just a few years,
Hmm.
it's, it's like trying to stay on the bull for 8 seconds, so to speak. But,
More than eight. Yeah, more than eight.
but I think generally like folks who know what they're really good at and they have the humility to know what they're bad at and hire leaders that complement them in those spaces, you can build something special where everyone has that sense of imposter syndrome because anyone who's really good knows how bad they are at things that they're not good at. And that builds like this immense sense of gratitude and respect when you're able to work with people who together like form a balanced and comprehensive team. And so I take a lot of pride and satisfaction in forming organizations that work like that, and empowering people who are worthy of trust to happen. You have to avoid abdication, never empower people who are not worthy of trust. And
I like that. I like
part.
that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good standard rule. Empower people and employ people that are worthy of your trust.
Yep.
All right, man, this has been great. If the listeners want to reach out or learn more about IDMe or what you guys have going on, where's the best place they can do that at?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Blake_Hall is my Twitter handle. You can find me on LinkedIn too through a pretty quick search there. And if you want to shoot me an email, it's just blake@id.me. So always love feedback of all kinds, especially critical feedback, because it means that folks care. And I'm always happy to help any entrepreneur who's first finding their way, because the first 2 years, if I didn't have people who are outside the company to help me, there's no way that I would be on this podcast right now talking to you, Chris.
Is it your advice going to be, hey, don't F it up?
I mean, that literally is what every boss I've had, not too many stages in the career in terms of jobs, but that's what my first boss in the military told me on my first mission, and the Warby Parker guy as well. So it seems to be thematic that if you can not screw it up, that you're going to be okay.
Yeah, if it's working for you, don't fix it like it's working so far. Right. All right, Blake, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciated you having you on the show. And listeners, thank you guys for tuning in once again, and we'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, buddy.